Hello history buffs and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be covering the last episode of season 1 of Wolf Hall. So without further ado, let's get into episode 6, Master of Phantoms. The episode's title, Master of Phantoms, refers to the torture of Mark Smeaton, which in the show is orchestrated by Cromwell. The title card tells us it's 1536 and that Henry's love for Anne Boleyn has turned to anger and distrust, and that he is now fixed on Jane Seymour. We open on a dream sequence. Thomas Cromwell is hosting a dinner party. Present is Edward Seymour, the Duke of Norfolk, Lady Margaret Pole, and Lady Exeter, all of whom are known enemies of Anne Boleyn. The Duke of Norfolk calls out that they are all hungry, and that Cromwell needs to bring out the food, to which food does get delivered, but Anne Boleyn, who is tied up, is dragged onto the table, and she is presented as if she is the main course. This scene symbolises how her enemies have all gathered around and how they are ready to feast on her. Not physically, obviously, but symbolically, as her downfall gets nearer. We then see Cromwell with a dagger ready to kill Anne, who is dressed in white, a sign of purity, and Cromwell looks quite reluctant, but goes through with it anyway. Again, so much symbolism is here, as history often portrays this as a friendship that turns sour into a power struggle, and it is indeed thought that if Cromwell had not struck when he did, it would have been his downfall, not Anne's. And you can see this in the dream sequence, that he is only sacrificing his friend, which is what this scene looks like, to save himself. Plus, with Anne dressed in white, she's quite literally a lamb being brought to the slaughter. So yeah, that was quite a lot for the opening scene. We then cut to Cromwell having a meal with his family and friends, notably Rafe and Gregory, demonstrating to us that the previous scene was indeed a dream. Then we cut to Anne, Cromwell and Henry. Anne has the Princess Elizabeth on her lap, and she is being a doting mother, which is lovely to see and also quite heartbreaking. From what little we have of Anne as a mother, by all accounts, she was very doting and maternal to Elizabeth. Anne can often get a bad rep for being spiteful, which I believe she was, but also seeing this side of her fleshes out her character so much more. It makes her human, and her downfall just even more tragic. She has clearly commissioned a new item of clothing for Elizabeth, something that we know she enjoyed doing, and as she shows it to Henry, we can see he is clearly annoyed and frustrated with his wife. His tolerance is low, and he leaves. Anne then calls to Cromwell with her French pronunciation, Cromwell. Anne expresses her disappointment that in the last episode, when it was thought that the king was dead, that she and her children, yes, I've put children because she was pregnant with a second child at the time, weren't his priority, and that the teenager, or bastard as Anne puts it, Mary, was. Cromwell is essentially trying to tell Anne that trying to secure the throne for an infant is a lot harder than for a teenager, who, don't forget, Mary was very popular. She was very well loved by the public and seen as the true heir by those in England at the time, despite being technically illegitimate. Anne then ultimately threatens Cromwell for what she sees as a betrayal, reminding Cromwell that she made him and that ultimately she can unmake him. Anne then says, "You're forgetting something. Those who have been made can be unmade." To which Cromwell says, "I entirely agree." But the way he says it, it's almost like he's saying it back at her, like, yes, you were made queen by your faction, and to an extent Cromwell, so you can also be unmade as queen. This interaction here, I personally interpret as the start of these two officially cutting ties as allies and starting the war of trying to bring each other down. Also, just for the record, I'm just referring to the start of this in terms of the TV show, not in terms of actually historical context. Now, I do apologise for the next scene, as I actually couldn't figure out who Cromwell was supposed to be talking to. So if you do know who he's talking to, please leave it for me in the comments. I genuinely want to know who he's supposed to be talking to. But the man Cromwell is talking to is obviously aligned with Jane Seymour's faction and is anti-Anne Boleyn, and he refers to her as the concubine, a term that is commonly associated with Imperial Ambassador Eustace Chapuis, despite the fact that Chapuis only really referred to her as the concubine twice, once in 1533 and again in 1535. It was actually Pedro Ortiz, Catherine of Aragon's proctor in Rome, who often referred to Anne as the concubine, when he wrote to Chapuis and Charles V, and he did so as early as 1531. Cromwell then asks what will happen to Anne, potentially showing some concern for a former friend, to which the man just shrugs and says, "Convent?" I think this is important because obviously we all know that Anne met a tragic end with a sword, but at the time, no one would have or could have guessed her fate. I would assume that even by Anne herself, that she thought the worst she would receive would be banishment to a convent to live out the rest of her life, which makes her actual fate even more shocking, not just to us, but also to her contemporaries. In the next scene, Anne, who is clearly bored, starts teasing and then, to be honest, outright bullying Mark Smeaton for her own entertainment. This interaction is done in a very clever way, as Anne is being playful with her remarks, which, to an enemy, could be seen as flirting. It's obviously not, but to the right person, or wrong person, it could be. And poor Mark, you can see his eyes are welling up as she bullies him, even telling him he's an inferior person. But in doing so, what they've done is showcase how ridiculous the idea of Anne committing adultery with Mark is, and how and why Mark Smeaton may have been so easily tortured into confessing anything, as there definitely was no love lost. Plus, Anne is reminding him of his place in the social standing, which unfortunately for Mark plays out during his execution. As Mark was the lowest born of the 5 men accused, and would have been executed last with the same bloody axe as the men that went before him. Anne then laughs as Mark leaves crying. Henry Norris and Francis Weston then start with some playful and slightly flirty banter with Anne and Madge Shelton, who they call Mary in the show. This is a dramatisation of the famous conversation that took place where Anne would ask Norris about why he's taking so long to propose to Lady Shelton, and then throw out the one-liner that basically sealed her fate. "You look for dead men's shoes, for if aught came to the king but good, you would look to have me." Anne then makes a rude remark about Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford's age. She goes to leave, and as William Brereton enters the room, she stops to listen. Throughout this series, we have said how Lady Rochford has set herself up almost as a spy master. The show frames it as if it was Lady Rochford who twisted this information and gave it to Cromwell for Anne's downfall, and we do actually see that scene. She has already offered her services of spying to Cromwell in the series, and as the next interaction shows, that this fictitious version of Anne and Jane Boleyn did not have a good relationship, despite being sister-in-laws. This version of the two Boleyn ladies, historically, I just don't believe that this is the case, but that's not important for now. Jane then hits back at Anne, saying,
"Do that again and I will hit you back. You're no queen. You're just a knight's daughter. And your time has come."
Again showing that there is no love lost in this relationship, and foreshadowing not only Anne's downfall, but Jane jumping ship and giving evidence to Cromwell. It's then after this heated exchange that Anne basically says the dead man's shoes line. It's here we can clearly see Anne's power and control slipping even in her own faction, and she becomes more frantic when those who are loyal to her aren't obeying orders, and she has to run after Henry Norris. Then we cut to Jane Boleyn filling Cromwell in on what we just witnessed, and a little bit extra. I've got to say, I personally just really don't like this portrayal of Lady Rochford. And it's nothing against Jessica Raine. I think she's a great actress, and I think she was brilliant as Catherine Parr in Becoming Elizabeth. But this version of Jane Boleyn has just been written to be quite spiteful. I just don't think it's true to what I've interpreted her character to be. She's also suggesting to Cromwell, well, asserting in terms of Norris, that Anne was/is intimate with both Sir Henry Norris prior to her marriage to the king and with her brother George, which is a myth/rumour that stems from the belief that Jane and George had an unhappy marriage, which there is just no evidence to support that claim. And from George Boleyn's trial, allegedly he said, "On the evidence of only one woman, you are willing to believe this great evil of me, and the basis of her allegations, you are deciding my judgment." People have interpreted that he meant his wife Jane, but he does not name Jane, nor does he actually say my wife. Anyway, that's just a long tangent that the show is going down narratively, and it's just setting it up with the conversation with Cromwell. The show then also heavily suggests that Anne is sleeping with George in a desperate attempt to father a male heir, which obviously is untrue, as incest between siblings was just as disgusting then as it is now. I mean, they had less of a problem when it was cousins, ew. But my problem is, everyone has a go at Philippa Gregory for this plot device in her fictional writing, and yet nobody has an issue when Hilary Mantel does it. I've heard people make the argument that Gregory's work isn't historically accurate and that it can mislead people. But you're missing the point. She writes fiction based on true events. If anything, the fact that people fall for it being true goes to show how good of a storyteller she is. Obviously, she could have written the truth, but the incest subplot is far more interesting, hence why Mantel does it as well. I used a quote from Gregory from a documentary once, and somebody basically had a go at me in the comments for it. And I'm like, you're just showing how ignorant you really are. Both Gregory and Hilary Mantel do a hell of a lot of research before they write their books. And it's that research that makes the world, the stories, and the characters that they write come alive, because they are using their knowledge to write something so believable. It's now the 2nd of May. Henry has left Anne at Greenwich. The Duke of Norfolk, Anne's uncle, has turned up with her arrest warrant, and she is arrested at Greenwich. Anne is placed under armed guard, and just like her real-life counterpart, we see Anne sat for dinner beneath a canopy of state, a symbol of her authority as queen. The only difference is my source says that Anne wore a gown of red velvet and cloth of gold, not pink like in the show. Anne then addresses several men, including Cromwell and the Duke of Norfolk, all men who at one point helped put her in this position. And that, ladies and gents, is all of the Easter eggs and little references I found in Wolf Hall Season 1, Episode 6. If I missed anything, please let me know in the comments down below. And with that, we have also finally finished Season 1 of Wolf Hall. I do apologise, I know it's been a bit of a long slog. I will be doing Season 2, don't worry, but I am going to be taking a break before tackling that. But I will also be filling in with a few more what ifs and stuff like that in the meantime, so please stay tuned for that. But anyway guys, that's it from me, and if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to give a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you next time.